are waiting for your life to begin. And you have been doing it so long that the waiting has started to feel like living. Not waiting in an obvious way. Not sitting idle. Not refusing to move. You are busy. You are building, planning, working toward things. But underneath all of it, there is a quiet assumption running like a current through everything you do, that the real version of your life is somewhere ahead, that this, right now, is the preparation, the rehearsal, the part you endure so that the actual thing can finally start. Watch what happens when you examine a normal week, the morning you tolerate to get to the weekend, the job you push through to get to the retirement, the version of yourself you're being right now that you privately regard as unfinished, not yet the person who deserves to be fully present, fully satisfied, fully alive. There is always a condition that hasn't been met yet, always a threshold just ahead of where you are standing. Alan Watts called this the backwards law, and in the Wisdom of Insecurity, he made an argument that almost no one who quotes him actually understands, that the pursuit of a future in which life finally becomes real is not preparation for living. It is the precise mechanism by which you avoid it. This video will show you exactly how that mechanism works and what it has already cost you. But here is what I need you to understand before we go any further. What Watts discovered is not a lesson about mindfulness. It is not an invitation to stop planning. It is something far more unsettling, a direct challenge to the way you experience being alive. If you watch to the end, you will not just think differently about time. You will see something about yourself that cannot be unseen. You have probably tried to fix this before. You noticed the pattern, named it, maybe even felt genuine resolve about it. And then life resumed its usual shape, and the resolve dissolved, and you were back to tolerating Monday for the sake of Friday. This happens not because you are weak or undisciplined. It happens because you are misidentifying the problem. You think the issue is a habit. Watts thought it was something structural, built into the way human consciousness works, and impossible to dismantle without first understanding what it actually is. Here is the mechanism. The human brain has a capacity no other animal possesses, the ability to leave the present moment entirely and inhabit imagined time. Memory pulls you backward, anticipation pulls you forward, and between those two forces, the actual present, the only place where anything is ever happening, becomes thin, almost transparent, not gone, but barely there, a surface you pass through on your way to somewhere else. Watts was precise about this in The Wisdom of Insecurity. The power of memories and expectations is such that for most human beings, the past and the future are not as real, but more real than the present. Read that again, slowly. Not equally real, more real. The conversation you had this morning, the meeting you are dreading next week. These carry more weight, more texture, more emotional charge than what is directly in front of you right now. The present has become the least vivid part of your experience, and you have come to accept this as normal. What makes this particularly difficult to see is that the machinery runs silently. You do not decide to leave the present. You simply find yourself gone, mid-conversation, mid-meal, mid-moment, already somewhere else, processing the past or rehearsing the future. The displacement is so automatic that it registers not as escape, but as thought, as being responsible, as being a person who takes life seriously. Here is something concrete you can do, starting today. Not a practice, an observation. For the next few days, notice the exact moment your attention migrates. Not the fact that it wandered, but the precise trigger. Was it the arrival of mild discomfort, mild boredom, a moment that didn't match the version of the moment you'd expected? That trigger point is where the machinery switches on, and once you can see it, you are no longer entirely inside it. The problem is not that you think about the future. Planning is not the enemy. The problem is something Watts identified with uncomfortable precision. Most people do not plan and then return to the present. They plan and stay there, living in the projected version of their life rather than the actual one. The future becomes the primary residence. The present becomes the waiting room. And waiting rooms, by definition, are not places where anything real is supposed to happen. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. There is a story Watts tells that most people recognize immediately and dismiss just as fast. It is the story of the businessman who works 70-hour weeks for 30 years, telling himself that when he retires, he will finally live, travel, rest, be present with the people he loves. And when retirement comes, he cannot do it. He goes back to work within 6 months, not because he needs the money, but because he has spent 3 decades building a self that only knows how to be somewhere else. The capacity for presence atrophied quietly. In the background, while he was busy preparing for the moment, he would use it. You probably read that and thought, not me, I'm not that extreme, and you may be right about the degree. But the structure is the same. Every time you treat the present as a corridor, something to move through efficiently on the way to a room where living actually happens, you are practicing the same skill he practiced. You are training yourself to be absent. And like any training, it compounds. Watts put it with the kind of precision that tends to land like a punch. They fail to live because they are always preparing to live. Instead of earning a living, they are mostly earning an earning. The brutality of that phrase is not in the wordplay. It is in what it describes. An entire life organized around the accumulation of conditions that will supposedly make life possible without ever arriving at the life itself. Not because the conditions never come, but because by the time they do, the person waiting for them has become someone who can only wait. This is what makes the pattern so difficult to break through willpower alone. You are not dealing with a bad habit layered on top of an otherwise intact life. You are dealing with a mode of consciousness, a way of structuring experience, that has become the default setting. And the terrifying thing Watts observed is that this mode does not pause when the conditions are finally met. The person who will live fully once they get the promotion brings the same structure to the promotion. The person who will be present once the anxiety settles brings the same structure to the settled moment. The future arrives, and they are already looking past it. Not because they are broken, but because looking past the present is what they have spent years learning to do. There is a specific delusion at the center of this that Watts refused to leave comfortable. It is the belief that the future version of you, the one who has resolved the current situation, reached the next milestone, finally become who you are supposed to be, will be a fundamentally different kind of person, more available, more capable of joy, more deserving of a full life. But that future person will be you, arriving with the same nervous system, the same ingrained patterns, the same reflex of treating wherever they are as a place to pass through. You cannot defer your way into presence. The you who finally arrives in the future you've been waiting for will look around, find some new reason the moment isn't quite right yet, and begin waiting again. Watts called this the vicious circle, not as a metaphor, but as a structural description. The mind chasing future satisfaction produces present dissatisfaction, which intensifies the chase, which deepens the dissatisfaction. Round and round, each revolution reinforcing the one before. And what is particularly cruel about this circle is that it feels like progress from the inside. The planning feels productive. The deferral feels responsible. The waiting feels like patience. Every loop around the circle can be narrated as forward motion right up until you run out of future to move toward. The question Watts forces you to sit with is not whether you are doing this. At some level, everyone is doing this. The question is, what exactly are you waiting for? Name it precisely. Not until things settle down. What things? And what does settled mean? Not until I feel ready. Ready for what? And what would ready actually feel like? The vagueness is not accidental. Vague conditions can never be met, which means the waiting never has to end, which means you never have to face what you are actually avoiding. The possibility that the life you have been saving yourself for is not waiting in the future at all, that it was here the whole time, and the preparing to live was always the thing standing in its way. Suppression is not the problem. The problem is more fundamental than anything you could fix by trying harder to be present. Watts identified something in the Wisdom of Insecurity that cuts beneath the surface of every self-improvement attempt, every mindfulness practice, every sincere resolution to stop deferring your life. He called it the divided self, the split between the I, who observes experience, and the me, who has it. And once you see it clearly, you will understand why so many attempts to change this pattern fail before they begin. Here is how the division works. At some point in the development of human consciousness, something strange happened. We became able to stand outside our own experience and watch it, to evaluate it, judge it, compare it to some imagined standard, and find it lacking. Every other animal lives inside its experience completely. Hunger is hunger. The sun on the skin is the sun on the skin, and neither is complicated by a separate observer deciding whether the experience measures up. But the human being has this additional layer, the watcher, the I that floats above the moment, assessing it, managing it, waiting for it to become something worth fully inhabiting. This is the structure that makes deferred living feel rational. The I that is doing the waiting is convinced that it is separate from the present moment, that it exists somewhere slightly outside of time, watching events unfold, biding its time until the right moment arrives. And from inside that structure, waiting makes perfect sense. Why be fully here when here is not yet what it needs to be? Why give yourself completely to a moment you have already judged as insufficient? What Watts saw, and this is the part that tends to produce a particular kind of discomfort, is that this separate I does not actually exist, not in the way you think it does. There is no observer floating above your experience, independent of it, waiting to enter it when conditions improve. There is only the experience itself, and the thought, I am observing this experience, is just another experience. One more wave in the stream, no more separate from it than any other. As he wrote, there is simply experience. There is not something or someone experiencing experience. This is not a philosophical footnote. It is the direct explanation of why the waiting never ends. The I that is waiting for the right moment to arrive is not a stable entity that will eventually get what it needs and settle into presence. It is a pattern of thinking, a habit of consciousness that perpetuates itself by always locating satisfaction just outside the current moment. Give it what it wants, and it will generate a new want. Meet its conditions, and it will produce new conditions. It is not waiting because circumstances require it. It is waiting because waiting is what it is. Try something Watts suggests, not as an exercise in relaxation, but as an experiment in seeing. At some point today, when you catch yourself mentally somewhere other than where you are, stop and try to locate the one who wandered. Not the thought that wandered, the thinker behind it. Look for the separate I that is doing the observing. You will find thoughts. You will find sensations. You will find more thoughts about the search itself. But the fixed, independent observer you were certain was there, the one who has been patiently waiting for your life to be ready, will not appear. Because it was never separate from the stream. It was always part of it. The implication of this is significant. If the self that is waiting for the future is not a stable thing that will eventually arrive at satisfaction, then the future you have been preparing for contains no one to receive it. The you, who finally gets the promotion, pays off the debt, reaches the version of yourself that deserves a full life. That person will not be the observer stepping into the life at last. They will simply be another moment, happening, unrepeatable, already becoming past before it can be fully grasped. And the habits of consciousness you bring to that moment will determine whether it is experienced as arrival or, again, as corridor. This is what makes Watts so unsettling to read. He is not offering a technique for becoming more present. He is pointing to the fact that the one who is trying to become more present is the obstacle. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. The meaning and purpose of dancing is the dance. Watts wrote this in the Wisdom of Insecurity, and it is easy to read it as a pleasant metaphor and move on. Don't. It is the most precise description he ever gave of what a life organized around the present actually looks like, and what a life organized around the future is actually missing. You do not dance to arrive somewhere. You do not play a sonata to reach the final chord. The music is not a vehicle for the ending. It is complete in every moment of its unfolding, or it is nothing at all. Most people understand this about music and cannot apply it to anything else. The backwards law, as Watts named it, is this: the harder you chase something, the faster it retreats. When you try to stay on the surface of the water, you sink. When you try to sink, you float. When you hold your breath, you lose it. These are not poetic inversions. They are descriptions of how certain kinds of pursuit structurally destroy what they are pursuing. And the pursuit of a future in which you will finally be fully alive is the clearest example of the law in operation. Here is what the law reveals when applied directly to how you are living. Every unit of energy you invest in the future as the place where life becomes real is simultaneously a unit of energy withdrawn from the present. This is not a trade-off you can optimize. It is not a balance to be struck between planning and presence. It is a structural feature of the chase itself. The act of treating the present as a corridor generates the experience of living in a corridor. The dissatisfaction is not a side effect of the strategy. It is the strategy producing itself. Watts saw this with particular clarity in what he called the vicious circle of brainy desire, the way the mind, fixated on a future it can imagine but never inhabit, becomes progressively less capable of tasting what is actually in front of it. The future is still not here, he wrote, and cannot become a part of experienced reality until it is present. Since what we know of the future is made up of purely abstract and logical elements, inferences, guesses, deductions, it cannot be eaten, felt, smelled, seen, heard, or otherwise enjoyed. To pursue it is to pursue a constantly retreating phantom, and the faster you chase it, the faster it runs ahead. The phantom does not slow down when you get closer. It accelerates. It is designed to stay just out of reach, because the moment it stops retreating, it becomes the present. And the present is exactly what you have trained yourself not to inhabit. This is the cruelty that Watts wanted to name directly. The person who has been saving their full attention, their real engagement, their genuine aliveness for the future they are building, that person is not being patient. They are practicing absence. Every day they spend treating life as preparation. They become more fluent in the language of not quite yet, more comfortable with the hum of future orientation as the background frequency of consciousness. And when the future finally arrives, when the threshold is crossed, when the condition is met, they will stand in it, fluent in exactly one language, which is the language of looking ahead. The dance metaphor matters because it points to what the alternative actually feels like from the inside. When you are dancing, there is no destination being deferred. The movement is not a means to an end that will justify the movement. Each step is complete. Each moment of music received and responded to is the whole point of the thing. You are not building toward a payoff. You are inside the payoff, continuously. And this is not a special condition available only in dance. It is a description of what presence feels like when the divided self stops insisting that experience must be somewhere other than here before it can be real. What Watts is not saying, and this matters, is that planning is the enemy. He is not asking you to stop thinking about tomorrow. He is pointing to something more specific: the difference between planning from the present and fleeing into the future. One is a function performed by a mind that is rooted in now, directing attention toward what needs to happen next, and then returning. The other is a permanent relocation, an emigration from the present into imagined time, conducted so gradually and so thoroughly that you stop noticing you ever left. The question worth sitting with is not whether you make plans, it is whether you ever come back. Go right into the middle of the fire. That is Watts quoting a Chinese sage who was asked how to escape the heat of suffering. It sounds like a koan designed to frustrate, but it is actually the most practical instruction in this entire video. Because the most common misreading of everything Watts is saying, the one that lets people nod along and change nothing, is the assumption that presence means comfort, that to be fully here means to be at peace with here. That presence is a pleasant, open, receptive state you settle into when conditions are finally right. It is not. And confusing presence with comfort is one of the primary reasons people mistake the performance of presence for the thing itself. You have seen the performance. Maybe you have done it. The deliberate slowing down, the conspicuous appreciation of small things, the person who announces they are being mindful the way someone announces they are on a diet. As a project, a discipline, a role being performed for an audience that includes themselves. This is not presence. This is the divided self doing what the divided self always does, standing outside experience, evaluating it, managing it, now with the additional goal of making the management look like surrender. The watcher is still there. It has just changed its agenda. Genuine presence, in Watts's framework, has nothing to do with mood or atmosphere. It does not require stillness. It does not require that the present moment be pleasant or meaningful or worthy of being fully inhabited. What it requires is the cessation of the internal campaign to be somewhere other than where you are. That campaign can run at full intensity during a meditation session and be completely absent during a difficult conversation. Presence is not a feeling you achieve. It is the dropping of a particular kind of resistance. Here is what that resistance actually looks like in practice, because Watts was specific about this in ways that most people who reference him are not. The resistance is not dramatic. It does not announce itself as avoidance. It arrives as naming. As the moment you stop experiencing fear and start thinking, "I am afraid." As the moment you stop receiving a conversation and start composing your response to it. As the moment the meal stops being taste and becomes assessment. Every time experience gets converted into a label, a category, a comparison to other experiences, something has stepped back from it. And that stepping back, accumulated across thousands of moments in a day, is what produces the persistent sense that life is happening at a slight remove. That you are watching it rather than inside it. Watts is explicit about the mechanism. So long as you are calling it names and saying, "I am happy" or "I am afraid," you are not being aware of it. This is not semantics. The label is the distance. The moment you name what you are feeling, you have positioned yourself as an observer of the feeling rather than the feeling itself. And the observer, as we established, is always looking for the exit, always locating the real experience somewhere ahead, in a future version of the moment that will be more suitable for full inhabitation. So what does the alternative look like, concretely? Not the theory, the actual texture of it. Watts describes it as the experience of receiving what is happening without immediately processing it through the filter of whether it matches what you wanted or expected. Not passive, not indifferent, more like the way you listen to music you have never heard before, without trying to predict it, without evaluating it against other music, simply receiving each moment of sound as it arrives, complete in itself. You are not trying to get anywhere. You are not managing the experience toward a particular outcome. You are, as he puts it, completely sensitive to each moment, in regarding it as utterly new and unique, in having the mind open and wholly receptive. The practical test Watts implies, and it is worth applying today in whatever situation you find yourself next, is this. Notice whether you are inside what is happening or beside it. Not in terms of emotional intensity, in terms of whether there is a gap between the experience and the one having it. Whether you can feel the slight bureaucratic distance of the self processing the moment rather than being the moment. That gap is the machinery running, and you do not close it by trying to close it. That is just the watcher trying to eliminate the watcher, which generates another layer of watching. You close it, if closing is even the right word, by seeing it clearly enough that the pretense of separation becomes difficult to maintain. This is why Watts insists that the solution is not a technique. Techniques are for producing things that do not yet exist. Presence is not something to be produced. It is what remains when the campaign against the present is suspended, even briefly, even imperfectly, long enough for the actual texture of the moment to register. It has been registering all along. You have simply been elsewhere. Nobody tells you that the waiting has a texture, that it does not feel like waiting. It feels like responsibility, like patience, like being a serious person who understands that good things take time. It feels, from the inside, almost virtuous, and that is precisely what makes it so difficult to see. Watts understood this with a clarity that bordered on merciless. What changes when you stop holding your breath is not the circumstances. The unresolved situations remain. The distance between where you are and where you thought you would be stays exactly what it is. What changes is that the present, received without the filter of what it is supposed to become, turns out to contain something you had not expected to find there. Not happiness, not resolution, something quieter. The simple, non-negotiable fact of being alive in this moment, which has been true the entire time you were looking past it. You have not been waiting because your life was not ready. You have been waiting because waiting felt safer than the alternative. The corridor felt manageable. The room, if it ever opened, might ask something of you that the corridor never did. It has been asking all along. So here is what you can do before this video ends, and the ordinary momentum of your day reasserts itself. Do not try to be present. Simply notice, once, without judgment, where your attention actually is right now. Not where it should be, where it is. That noticing, unforced, unperformed, just accurate, is not a step toward presence. It is presence. The room was always the corridor, and the person who was going to start arriving was always you, always here, always now. Thank you for staying until the end. If this video resonated with you, the one showing up on your screen right now will too. Click to keep watching.